You're listening to Salt on the Tongue, Book 1 of the Ash of the Veil series. We hope you enjoy your journey. Chapter 1, The Contract. The wind howled through the Kar-steppe ossuary like the last breath of the dying, carrying the scent of dust and decay. The church, if it could be called that, was a cathedral of bones, arches formed from rib cages bleached white by endless sun, vaults supported by femurs stacked like cordwood. Lanterns hung from the rafters, their wicks dipped in rendered human fat, casting a sickly yellow glow that flickered over the supplicants sprawled across the floor. Yelka Morozova knelt among them, her knees grinding into the gritty stone, her hands steady despite the tremor in her gut. She was 19. But the plague had aged her beyond years, etching lines around her eyes that spoke of nights without sleep and days without mercy. Her father's trade had made her this, a stitcher of flesh, a whisperer to the dead. The current victim before her was old Marta, whose skin hung loose like a deflated bellows, pocked with the black boils of the pestilence. "Hold still," Yelka murmured, her voice a threadbare rasp. She threaded a bone needle with horsehair, the coarse strands still smelling faintly of the steppe grasses where the beasts had grazed before the sickness took them too. Marta whimpered, her eyes glassy with fever. "It burns, child, like fire in my veins." Yelka nodded, though she knew words were useless against the plague. It came from the east, they said, carried on the hooves of Qing horses, or perhaps born from the wrath of forgotten gods. Her father, the plague doctor, had ventured into the deeper steppes weeks ago, chasing rumors of a cure in the salt flats, leaving her to tend the village alone. The ossuary was their sanctuary, a place where the bones of ancestors watched over the living, or so the old tales claimed. Yelka pierced the skin around the boil, drawing the edges together with careful pulls. Pus wept from the wound, thick and foul, but she didn't flinch. She'd stitched worse, her own thigh once after a wolf's bite, using a shard of mirror to guide the needle. The dead spoke to her in those moments, their voices a murmur in the wind, telling her where to cut, how deep to go. Marta wasn't dead yet, but close enough. Her breaths came in shallow rattles, syncing with the distant thunder of hooves that never seemed to stop. Around her the other afflicted groaned in chorus. Children with swollen bellies, men whose limbs twisted like roots, women clutching rosaries made from finger bones. The air was thick with the copper tang of blood and the sour reek of unwashed bodies. Yelka wiped her brow with the back of her hand, leaving a smear of ichor on her pale skin. Her dark hair, braided tight to keep it from her face, was matted with sweat. She wore the traditional sarafan, stained and patched, its hem frayed from kneeling. A shadow fell across the threshold, deeper than the lantern light could pierce. The wind stilled for a heartbeat, and the groans quieted as if the plague itself held its breath. Yelka looked up, needle poised mid-stitch. Ravens. A cloak of them, swirling in a black vortex that poured through the doorway like ink spilling from a bottle. Feathers rustled, beaks clicked, eyes gleamed like obsidian beads. They coalesced into the form of a man, tall and lean, his face emerging from the feathered mass like a blade from a sheath. He was not of the village. His skin was weathered bronze, marked with intricate tattoos that snaked up his neck. Qing brands, she realized with a chill. The sigils of slaves and conquerors. His eyes were dark pools, holding the steppes' endless night, and his hair fell in a warrior's braid, tipped with a single raven feather. He wore a deal of black wool, edged with silver thread that caught the light like frost on bones. The ravens settled on his shoulders, perching like living epaulets, their heads tilting in unison. "Who are you?" Yelka demanded, rising to her feet. Her voice echoed off the bone walls, sharper than she'd intended. The afflicted stirred, murmuring prayers, but none dared approach. The man inclined his head, a gesture both courtly and predatory. "Kosudei Batar," he said, his voice a low rumble like thunder over the plains. "Last of the Oirat princes. And you, stitcher of sores. A Yelena Morozova. She stiffened. How did he know her name? The ravens cawed softly as if in agreement. What do you want? We have nothing for outsiders. The plague takes all comers equally. He stepped forward, the ravens parting like smoke. Up close she saw the scars, fine lines across his cheeks as if claws had raked his face long ago. His scent was strange. Smoke and salt with an undercurrent of something metallic like blood fresh from the vein. I come with an offer. Your village teeters on the edge of the void. The Qing ride closer each day, their scythes hungry for souls. But I can save them. Everyone. Yelka laughed, a bitter sound that made Marta flinch. Save them? With what? Prayers to your step gods? We've tried that. The bones here mock such hopes. She gestured to the arches where skulls grinned from niches, empty sockets staring down. Kuss's lips curved, not quite a smile. Not prayers. A contract. From within his deal, he produced a parchment, yellowed and crackling, inscribed with script she couldn't read, runes that twisted like fern fronds, glowing faintly in the lantern light. 1 night for every soul you save. I will coax the life from you, milk the flower that blooms in your blood. In return, the plague recedes, the Qing turn aside. Your people live. Her heart stuttered. Milk the flower? The words evoked old tales, whispered by grandmothers around the fire. The fern flower of Kupalo, blooming 1 night a year, granting wishes to those pure enough to claim it. But this man spoke of it as if it grew in her, a parasite or a gift. And the cost? 1 night, intimate, invasive. Heat flushed her cheeks, unbidden, mingling with the ossuary's chill. What flower? She asked, though fear coiled in her belly. The ravens shifted, wings brushing her arm like a lover's touch. Kuss's eyes locked on hers, unblinking. The one that will rebirth my people, or end them. You carry it, Yelka. In your womb, in your veins. Sign, and I will draw it forth. Refuse, and the steppe claims all. She glanced at Marta, whose chest heaved with labored breaths. The village, 200 souls, fevered and fading. Her father gone, perhaps dead. The Qing, with their silk banners and iron hooves, already scorching the horizon. What choice was there? Ink, she said, voice steady now. No ink. Kuss extended the parchment. Your blood, the salt on your tongue. Yelka hesitated, then reached beneath her sarafan. The rags between her legs were sodden, the moon's curse upon her as timely as it was cruel. She pricked her finger with the bone needle. No, deeper. She tore a strip from the cloth, warm and sticky, and pressed it to the parchment. Crimson bloomed on the yellow, her signature a smear of life and shame. The runes flared, absorbing the stain, and a warmth spread through her hand, up her arm, settling low in her belly like a promise. Kuss took the parchment, his fingers brushing hers, calloused, warm. He lifted it to his mouth and licked, slow and deliberate, his tongue tracing the edges of her blood. The ravens crooned, a sound like distant wolves. Yelka watched, transfixed, as the parchment gleamed wet, the blood vanishing into him. His eyes closed for a moment, throat working, and when they opened, they burned with something ancient, hungry. It is sealed, he said, voice rougher now. Midnight, in the yurt beyond the ossuary. Come alone, Stitcher. Or the contract breaks. And so do they. He turned, the ravens swirling up to cloak him again, and vanished into the wind as suddenly as he'd come. Yelka sank to her knees, the needle slipping from her fingers. Marta's eyes fluttered open, clearer now, the boil already shrinking. Whispers spread among the afflicted. Miracle. Salvation. But Yelka felt the pull in her blood, a thorned vine uncoiling within. The dead murmured approval from the bones, their voices blending with the wind's wail. She stitched on through the afternoon, the ossuary's shadows lengthening like fingers reaching for her. Each pull of the thread reminded her of the pact, the intimacy it demanded. What did he mean by milking? Fingers delving, mouth claiming? Her body, traitor that it was, quickened at the thought, a slick heat unrelated to the plague's fever. Shame burned her cheeks, but so did resolve. For the village, she'd endure. As dusk fell, the lanterns were relit, their fat wicks sputtering. Yelka washed her hands in a basin of brackish water, the bloodstains lingering like ghosts. She slipped from the ossuary, the bone arches sighing behind her. The steps stretched vast and empty, dotted with yurts like white mushrooms after rain. Hers was smallest, a healer's tent filled with herbs and lancets. But she didn't go there. The moon rose fat and silver, bathing the world in salt light. Midnight approached, marked by the toll of a bone bell in the distance. Yelka's steps led her to the yurt curse had indicated, a structure of flayed horsehide, stretched taut over willow frames, its entrance flanked by raven-perched stakes. She pushed the flap aside, heart pounding. Inside, a single lantern burned, illuminating a table of antlers lashed together, cushions of wolf fur scattered about. Curse waited, uncloaked now, his deal open to reveal the brands marching across his chest, dragons and chains etched in scar tissue. He held a bowl of mare's milk, steaming faintly. "You came," he said, no surprise in his tone. "For them." Yelka lifted her chin, though her knees trembled. "What now?" He set the bowl down, approaching with the grace of a predator. "Now, we begin. Lie back. Let me show you the flower." His hands were gentle as he guided her to the antler table, the points cool against her skin through the sarafan. She complied, breath shallow, as he knelt between her legs. The first touch was a shock, his fingers slick with mare's milk, tracing her inner thigh. Upward, insistent, parting the fabric. Yelka gasped, arching despite herself. "What are you—" "Shush!" His voice was a command wrapped in silk. "The contract binds us. Feel it stir." And she did. Deep within, a warmth unfurled, petals brushing her insides like a secret awakening. His touch deepened, coaxing, and pleasure twisted with pain, a vine threading through her core. The ravens outside called, echoing her stifled cries. But this was only the ceiling. The true milking would come with the nights ahead. For now, the bond took root, thorny and inevitable in the heart of the Bone Church's shadow. Chapter 2. Midnight Milking. The yurt's air hung heavy with the musk of tanned hides and the faint, sweet tang of mare's milk, a scent that clung to Yelka's skin like a second layer as she lay splayed upon the antler table. The points of the branching horns pressed into her back through the thin fabric of her sarafan, not quite painful, yet a constant reminder of her vulnerability, her exposure. Curse loomed above her, his bronze skin glistening in the lantern's dim glow, the ravens outside the yurt murmuring like a chorus of uneasy spirits. This was no mere ceiling. Midnight had struck, the bone bell tolling its hollow note in the distance, and the true milking had begun. Yelka's breath came in shallow bursts, her chest rising and falling beneath the weight of his gaze. The warmth from their earlier touch still lingered low in her belly, a coiling vine that had retreated but not vanished, waiting to be stirred again. She wanted to speak, to demand what madness this was, but the contract's pull silenced her tongue. Or perhaps it was the hunger in his eyes, ancient and insatiable, that stole her words. "Breathe," Curse murmured, his voice a rumble that vibrated through the antler frame. He dipped his fingers into the bowl of mare's milk beside the table, the liquid warm from some hidden fire, and traced a slow circle around her navel, soaking the cloth until it clung transparently to her skin. The milk was silken, warmer than blood, and it seeped through the fabric like a lover's promise, igniting sparks along her nerves. Yelka arched involuntarily, a gasp escaping her lips. "What? What is this flower you speak of?" she managed, her voice threaded with defiance even as her body betrayed her, hips shifting against the unyielding antlers. Q's lips curved, a predator's smile shadowed by the scars on his cheeks. "The fern flower of my people," he said, his free hand parting the folds of her sarafan with deliberate care, exposing the pale expanse of her thighs to the yurt's chill. "It blooms in wombs like yours, fed by the salt of life and the heat of union. The Qing scorched it from the earth, but it endures in bloodlines like yours, Slavic echoes mingled with steppe seed. Tonight I coax its buds open, one by one, until the village breathes easier." His milk-slick fingers ventured higher, brushing the edge of her undergarments, and Yelka's world narrowed to that point of contact, a jolt that made her clench her fists against the table's edge. She should have fought, should have clawed at him like the stitcher of sores she was, accustomed to wielding needles as weapons. But the contract thrummed in her veins, a binding heat that turned resistance to ache. The dead whispered from the bones beyond the yurt walls, names she knew, faces she'd stitched, urging her onward. For them. Always for them. "Do it then," she whispered, hating the tremor in her voice, the way her legs parted just a fraction under his touch. Q's did not rush. He was a prince of patience forged in genocide's forge, his movements measured as he poured more milk from the bowl, letting it trickle down her abdomen in rivulets that pooled at the juncture of her thighs. The liquid was alive, almost, carrying the essence of the steppe mares. Wild, untamed, their milk said to hold the spirits of foals yet unborn. He peeled away the last barriers of cloth with reverent hands, as if unveiling a sacred relic, and Yelka felt the cool air kiss her most intimate places, mingling with the warm milk to create a sensation that bordered on torment. His fingers followed the trail of milk, parting her folds with a gentleness that belied the hunger in his eyes. "Feel it," he commanded softly, pressing inward, the slickness easing his path. Yelka cried out, her head falling back against the antlers, the points now digging in like insistent lovers. Inside her the vines stirred again, uncoiling with a phantom brush of leaves, fern-buds swelling against her inner walls. It was no illusion. She felt them, tiny knots of pressure blooming under his touch, each stroke coaxing them to unfurl. Pleasure twisted through her like a steppe wind, sharp and unrelenting, but laced with horror. What was this thing inside her? A curse? A gift? Q's fingers curled, finding rhythms that made her hips buck, the antler table creaking beneath them. He leaned closer, his breath hot against her ear, the scent of smoke and salt enveloping her. "The buds drink the milk through you," he explained, his voice husky now, strained with his own restraint. "Your body is the soil. You'll release the rain. Scream if you must. The dead will hear and rise a little in their graves." Yelka's hands gripped the table's edges, knuckles white as waves built within her. His thumb circled her pearl, milk-slick and insistent, while his fingers delved deeper, milking the buds with precise thrusts. The yurt spun, the lantern's flame dancing like a demon's tongue. She thought of the ossuary, the boils she'd stitched that afternoon. Martyr's fever broken, others stirring with newfound strength. The contract worked. The plague receded even as her body surrendered. But the cost, gods, the cost was this unraveling, this blooming shame. Q's other hand roamed upward, pushing aside the sarafan to expose her breasts to the air. He anointed them with milk too, his mouth following, tongue lapping at the droplets before closing over a nipple with a suck that echoed the ritual's name. Yelka moaned, the sound raw and animal, her back arching off the table. The buds inside her throbbed in response, swelling fuller, their edges sharpening like thorns against her sensitive flesh. Pain lanced through the pleasure, a horrifying reminder that this flower was no gentle bloom. It was the resurrection of a slaughtered nation, rooted in her most private depths. "Tell me your secrets, Stitcher," Q growled against her skin, his teeth grazing lightly, not breaking but threatening. "What do the dead say to you? His free hand pinned her hip, holding her steady as his fingers quickened, the wet sounds of milk and arousal filling the yurt like a profane chant. They spoke of drownings, of twins lost in shame, of rivers turned to dust under Qing hooves. But Yelka couldn't form words. Sensation overwhelmed her, the vine coiling tighter, buds pressing outward as if seeking light through her skin. Her womb clenched around his intrusion, the pressure building to a crescendo that promised oblivion. "Curse!" she gasped, his name a plea or a curse, she couldn't tell. He lifted his head, eyes locking on hers, dark and fathomless. "Let it come. Milk it from you." His mouth claimed hers then, fierce and demanding, tongue tasting of her blood from the contract, mingled with the sweet milk. The kiss broke her. The dam shattered and ecstasy crashed through her like a step storm. Yelka screamed, the sound tearing from her throat, not her own name but others. Anya, Dmitri, old Father Ivan, the litany of the dead from the ossuary, their voices pouring from her lips as if she'd become their vessel. The buds burst open in her core, a flood of warmth spilling forth, petals unfurling in waves that milked his fingers in rhythmic pulses. Her body convulsed, thighs clamping around his hand, the antler table groaning under the force of her release. Pleasure bordered on agony, the fern's thorns scraping her insides even as bliss radiated outward, leaving her trembling, spent. Curse withdrew slowly, his fingers glistening with a mixture of milk, her essence, and something else. Petals? No, just the echo, the slick remnants of the bloom. He brought them to his lips, tasting solemnly, his eyes closing as if savoring a sacrament. "The first harvest," he murmured, voice rough with satisfaction. "The village lives another night." Yelka lay panting, the yurt's ceiling of horsehide blurring through tears she hadn't realized she'd shed. Her body hummed, sated yet hollowed, the vine inside her quiet now, buds spent but not gone, merely waiting for the next midnight. Shame warred with a treacherous satisfaction. She'd climaxed for strangers' lives, screamed their names in ecstasy. What monster had the contract made of her? Kurs helped her sit up, his touch gentle now, wrapping a fur blanket around her shoulders. The ravens outside quieted, as if sated too. "Rest," he said, brushing a damp strand of hair from her face. "Dawn brings new trials." But in his eyes she saw the flicker of something softer. Gratitude? Desire unbound by ritual? She dressed in silence, the seraphim clinging damply, each movement a reminder of the invasion. Slipping from the yurt, the steppe air bit at her flushed skin, the moon dipping low. The village stirred faintly. Groans turned to sighs, fevers breaking like the buds within her. For now, salvation. But dawn crept over the horizon like a thief, painting the sky in blood-streaked hues. Yelka had barely reached her own tent, collapsing onto her pallet, when the first screams pierced the air, not of plague, but of fire. She bolted upright, heart slamming, and rushed outside. The horizon blazed. Qing scouts, a vanguard of death on swift ponies, their silk banners snapping like whips. Torches arced through the air, landing on yurts with greedy whooshes, flames devouring the horsehide structures in seconds. The ossuary loomed in the distance, its bone arches silhouetted against the inferno, but even it wouldn't stand. Villagers spilled from their homes, coughing smoke, clutching children as the riders circled, sabers flashing. Yelka spotted Marta, the old woman she'd stitched, her skin clear now, but eyes wide with terror as a yurt collapsed behind her. "No!" Yelka cried, running toward the chaos, but strong arms encircled her waist. Kurs, materializing from the shadows, his ravens swirling protectively. "The contract holds for you," he hissed in her ear, dragging her back toward the yurt's remnants. "But the Qing care not for flowers. We flee, or we burn with them." Arrows whistled, one grazing his shoulder, drawing blood that smelled of iron and stars. The village ignited around them, screams merging with the crackle of flames, the names of the dead she'd screamed in pleasure now real wails in the dawn. Yelka twisted in his grip, watching Marta fall under a rider's blade, her newly saved life snuffed like a lantern wick. Horror choked her, hotter than the fires. The ritual had bought time, but not enough. The fern inside her twisted in sympathy, a thorn in her gut. As Curse pulled her toward the waiting shadows of the Hollow Mare caravan on the stepp's edge, she realized the truth. Salvation was a lie, and their bond, forged in milk and blood, would be tested in ashes. Chapter 3: Flight. The dawn broke like a wound across the sky, crimson and jagged, as flames devoured the village in greedy gulps. Yelka's world had narrowed to the iron grip of Curse's arm around her waist, his body a shield against the arrows whistling past like vengeful spirits. The screams of the villagers, those she'd stitched and bled for, those whose names she'd screamed in ecstasy mere hours before, twisted in her gut like the fern-buds still tender within her. "Move!" Curse snarled, his voice cutting through the roar of fire and the thunder of hooves. He hauled her forward, boots pounding the trampled earth toward the edge of the settlement, where the Hollow Mare waited, a spectral line of black wagons shrouded in the smoke. The caravan was no ordinary train of merchants' carts. It was the funeral procession of a people. 40 wagons painted the color of raven wings, their canvas tops embroidered with faded motifs of galloping horses and blooming ferns. The lead wagon bore the emblem of a hollow mare, her ribs outlined in bone-white thread, pulling an empty yoke where ghost horses should have strained. Wheels creaked softly, greased with a mixture of mare's milk and congealed blood, as if the very step wept for the Oirat dead. It had arrived under cover of night, its drivers silent shadows who'd bartered passage for whispers of the plague's retreat, passage that now meant salvation or a mass grave on wheels. Qing scouts swarmed the periphery, their silk tunics fluttering like bloodied flags, sabers glinting in the firelight. One rider veered toward them, his face a mask of imperial fury, bow drawn taut. Yelka's hand flew to the dagger at her belt, the one she'd used to lance boils, now slick with her own fear sweat. But Curse was faster. He released her just long enough to snatch a fallen torch from the ground, hurling it with a curse that echoed the raven's cries. The flaming brand struck the horse's flank, eliciting a scream that mingled man and beast, sending the scout tumbling into the dirt. "Inside!" Curse barked, shoving Yelka toward the nearest wagon. She scrambled up the step, her sarafan tearing on a splintered rail, the fabric whispering against her thighs like a lover's regret. The interior was dim, heavy with the scent of aged leather and dried herbs, shelves lined with jars of what might have been medicines or poisons. No time to wonder. She turned to help Curse, but he was already vaulting aboard, a stolen saber in hand from the scout's saddle. The caravan lurched as he slashed the tether to the rear wagons, sacrificing the stragglers to lighten their load, then cracked the reins over the empty yoke. To Yelka's astonishment, phantom shapes materialized in the traces. Translucent horses, their coats shimmering like heat haze, eyes glowing with the pale fire of the undead. The ghost herd surged forward, wheels biting into the steppe soil, with a groan that vibrated through Yelka's bones. Behind them, the village collapsed into a pyre, the ossuary's bone arches cracking like thunder under stray arrows. A scout's bullet pinged off the wagon's iron rim, inches from her head, and Yelka ducked low, heart hammering. "How do you command them?" she gasped, clutching the edge of a bench as the caravan rattled onto the open steppe. Curse's laugh was bitter, edged with the pain of his grazed shoulder, blood seeping through his cloak. Blood calls to blood. The Oirat dead pull for their prince, even in chains. He glanced back, eyes narrowing at the pursuing riders. 5 now, their ponies kicking up dust devils in the dawn light. The steppe stretched endless before them, a sea of bone dust and withered grass. But the Qing were relentless, their war cries slicing the air like whips. Yelka's mind reeled, the night's ritual clashing with this dawn's horror. The milking had bought life, but death had come anyway, claiming Marta and the others in flames rather than fever. Rage boiled in her chest, hot as the fires they'd fled. "You promised salvation," she accused, her voice raw over the wind's howl. "Lies, all of it. The contract, the flower, you." Curse's jaw tightened, his hands white-knuckled on the reins. "I promised time, Stitcher. Time to bloom what the Empire scorched. The Qing burn worlds to ash. We steal fire from their veins." As if to punctuate his words, he swerved the lead wagon sharply, forcing the ghost horses into a tighter formation. The caravan snaked across the plain, wagons bumping like the vertebrae of some great beast fleeing the hunter. Gunfire cracked again, a bullet splintering the wagon's sideboard. Yelka flinched, then straightened, her plague doctor's instincts kicking in. She rummaged through the shelves, fingers closing on a jar of thick amber salve, opium-laced, meant for the dying. But dying they would not be. She smeared it on a rag, then leaned out the back, hurling it toward the nearest rider. The jar shattered on his pony's chest, the horse rearing in confusion, buying them precious seconds. The scouts closed in, one flanking to the left, saber raised. Kirsch met him head-on, leaping from the moving wagon with a roar that summoned more ravens from the sky. They dove like arrows, pecking at the rider's eyes, forcing him to swat blindly. Kirsch collided with the man mid-air, nearly tumbling both from the saddle, but he twisted the saber free and drove it home. The scout slumped, and Kirsch remounted the stolen pony, riding parallel to the caravan, a dark guardian. Yelka watched, breath caught as he fought, not with princely grace, but with the feral desperation of a man who'd lost everything but this moment. Blood streaked his face, mingling with sweat, and something shifted in her, a spark amid the ashes of betrayal. He was no savior, but neither was she innocent. The fern twisted in her womb, a secret weapon forged in pleasure's fire. The sun climbed higher, baking the steppe into a furnace, but the pursuers faltered, their ponies foaming, arrows spent. By midday, the caravan outpaced them, the riders shrinking to specks on the horizon. Exhaustion claimed Yelka then, her body slumping against the wagon's wall, the adrenaline ebbing like a receding tide. Qing returned, tying the pony to the rear and climbing inside, his presence filling the cramped space like smoke. He collapsed beside her, chest heaving, the scent of gunpowder and blood clinging to him. "We're clear. For now," he said, voice hoarse. His eyes met hers, dark pools reflecting the flicker of emotion she couldn't name. Gratitude? Lust? The ritual's echo lingered between them, her skin still humming from the night's touch. Yelka reached out, tentative, her fingers brushing the wound on his shoulder. "Let me stitch it," she murmured, the healer in her overriding the fury. He nodded, shrugging off his cloak, revealing the branded scars across his chest, Qing marks twisted like thorns. As she threaded a needle with horsehair from the wagon's stores, her hands trembled not from fear, but from the proximity, the heat radiating from his skin. The needle pierced flesh, and Qing hissed, but his gaze never left her face. "You fight like one born to the steppe," he said softly, the wagon's sway rocking them closer. "Not just stitching sores, but souls." She tied off the stitch, her thumb lingering on his collarbone. "And you kiss death like a lover. What are you really, Qing?" His hand captured hers, pulling her toward him. "The last of the cursed. The one who needs your bloom to break the veil." The words hung heavy, but then his lips crashed against hers, desperate and claiming, tasting of gunpowder from the fray, and something deeper, saltier. The metallic tang of placenta, as if he'd swallowed the essence of birth and battle whole. Yelka froze for a heartbeat, then melted into it, her mouth opening under his assault. The kiss was no gentle sealing. It was war embodied, tongues clashing like sabers, teeth nipping in the promise of more. His hands roamed her back, bunching the sarafan, fingers digging into her hips with the same precision he'd used in the yurt. She tasted the chaos on him, the smoke of the village, the blood of the scout, and it ignited her own fire, the fern-buds stirring faintly, responding to the press of his body. She broke away gasping, forehead against his. This changes nothing. The village changes everything, he countered, his breath ragged. We're bound now, beyond contract. Fleeing together, bleeding together. His lips brushed her neck, trailing fire, and Yelka arched, a moan escaping despite the grief clawing her throat. The wagon rocked, the ghost horse's ethereal whinny echoing her surrender. But passion yielded to survival as the sun dipped low, painting the steppe in bruised purples. They emerged from the wagon to tend the caravan, securing the wagons in a defensive circle. Among the spoils from the raid was a Qing banner, silk rippling like water, stolen from the lead scout's saddle. It bore Colonel Zhao's insignia, a dragon coiled around a frozen lotus, and Kirsch draped it over the central wagon as camouflage, its edges whispering secrets in the wind. Night fell swiftly on the steppe, the moon rising full and merciless, bathing the world in silver. Yelka stood watch, the chill seeping through her torn sarafan when the banner stirred. Not with wind, but as if drinking the light, the silk absorbing moonlight like parched earth. She approached, heart quickening, curse at her side. The fabric shimmered, then transformed. No longer a banner of empire, it became a mirror, reflecting not the stars but her own body, naked, ethereal, projected upon the silk. Yelka's form writhed in vision, her abdomen glowing from within, a radiant womb pulsing with verdant light. Fern fronds unfurled there, delicate yet fierce, petals veined with starlight, the flower blooming in sacred fury. It was her, yet not, goddess and vessel, the key to resurrection etched in luminous silk. Curse's breath caught, his hand tightening on her arm. The veil thins. Zhao's banner sees what the Empire fears, your power, blooming. Yelka stared, transfixed, horror and awe twisting within her. The glowing womb pulsed in time with her heartbeat, a promise of nations reborn or worlds unmade. The steppe wind carried whispers, ancestors' voices urging her onward as the caravan creaked into the night, bearing witnesses to the mythic fire they'd stolen from the ashes.